When Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, he left a coveted inheritance. The power of Rome stretched across the entire Mediterranean region. This was just the beginning. Caesar's heirs, Octavian, his adoptive son, and Mark Antony, his right-hand man, set aside their differences to avenge him. United against the Republicans, they punished Caesar's murderers Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in Greece. Victory legitimized their power and determined their areas of influence. Octavian obtained the western provinces and the task of solving Rome's internal issues. Antony, as the architect of the victory, took the eastern provinces, the richest part of the empire. His mission, to conquer new territories with the aid of Egypt. Antony set out to win over Cleopatra, who was suspected of having aided Caesar's assassins.
Docundate.
Contrary to protocol, Cleopatra didn't meet Antony as he disembarked. Instead, she invited him to dine on board her royal galley.
Υποψιζόμαστε πως στήριξες τον Κάσιο και τους δημοκρατικούς.
Με κατηγορείς. Πως δεν αγωνίστηκα απλά εις όσους ήθελαν να εκδικηθούν για τον Καίσαρα, ενώ δεν έπαψα να ασχολούμαι με αυτό. Ήμουν δεμένη με τον Καίσαρα.
Γιατί οι ναυτικές δυνάμεις που μας υποσχεθήκες δεν έφτασαν ποτέ προορισμό τους. Θέλουμε να ξέρουμε την πραγματική θέση της Αιγύπτου και της Κλεοπάτρας.
Ανέλαβα τη διοίκηση ενός στόλου για να σας βοηθήσω. Δυστυχώς, μια φοβερή καταιγίδα με ανάγκασε να γυρίσω πίσω.
Μία καταιγίδα. Εστώ. Αλλά τι έχεις να πεις για τις λεγιώνες που άφησε ο Καίσαρας της Αιγύπτου? Από ό,τι μου είπαν, ο Κάσιος τις κατέλαβε.
Τις έστειλα για να βρουν στο στρατηγό σου. Αλλά αυτός είχε την ατυχία να ιτηθεί από τον Κάσιο, ο οποίος έσπευσε να τις εντάξει στο στόλο του. 2 φορές με απείλησε ο Κάσιος, αλλά δεν τον φοβήθηκα παρά τη μεγάλη στην ισχύ του στην Ανατολή. Όταν ηρέμησε η θάλασσα, ήταν πια άργα. Είχες ήδη νικήσει στους Φιλίππους και εκδικηθεί για τον Καίσαρα. Πράγμα για το οποίο σε ευχαριστώ.
Antony followed Cleopatra through Egypt. This compelling encounter evolved into a passionate love affair. In Alexandria, Antony rested, leading a luxurious lifestyle at Cleopatra's side. As a sovereign of 10 years standing, she ruled over the largest kingdom in the ancient Greek Empire, while Antony occupied the finest post in the Roman world. Brilliant, cultured, and attractive, Antony and Cleopatra believed they were fated to be together. Every day they showered each other with boundless gifts and pleasures. Cleopatra was never at a loss to provide a new kind of activity or performance to entertain him. The Queen of Egypt and Rome's greatest warrior fell equally under each other's spell. Totally enamored, one never left the other's side.
Ce coup de foudre entre Antoine et Cléopâtre à Tarse a fait couler beaucoup d'encre. Les historiens antiques ont parlé de manipulation de Cléopâtre. Elle aurait ensorcelé Antoine. Elle aurait fait de lui son pantin afin de réaliser ses propres rêves de grandeur et de domination.
Shared political interests had little to do with their bond. Antony and Cleopatra fell in love because of who they both were as people. Though in Egypt, Antony didn't neglect his fortune and assets in the East. He had entrusted them to his family before his departure. But they were now at war with Octavian, whose ambitions were plain to see. He wanted Antony's lands and armies. The new situation forced Antony to return to Rome after 1 year, even if it meant putting on hold his undying love for Cleopatra. He led an armada of 200 ships with the aim of personally restoring order in his affairs. The fearful Octavian had cause for concern. Antony had known victory in countless wars. Octavian proposed reconciliation, a smartly thought-out political arrangement which would be hard for Antony to accept. To seal their new alliance, Octavian offered Antony the hand of his favorite sister, the discreet Octavia. Through this arranged marriage, they became members of one family. Rome, exhausted by constant warring, breathed a sigh of relief. Antony spent 3 years at the side of Octavian's sister, his heart torn by the memory of Cleopatra. He reminded Octavian of their tasks, decided when the empire was divided. In the west, Octavian was to rid Italy of Sextus Pompey and his troublesome bands of pirates, while in the east, Antony was to defeat Parthia in order to continue Caesar's conquests. Each would help the other, Antony by sending ships to Octavian, Octavian by dispatching 20,000 men to Antony. Antony returned to the east. When Antony rejoined Cleopatra, none of their passion had died. With the sweetness of life in Egypt, he was confronted by two antagonistic visions of the world, East and West. Torn between Roman and Greek culture, Antony had to choose. At that point, he didn't know he would never return to Rome. Here he led the life of an Eastern prince. Rome criticized him, that he knew, but he paid little attention. The historian Appian tells us, Cleopatra gave him a splendid welcome, and he spent the winter without bearing the insignia of his command, living according to the customs and lifestyle of a simple man. He set aside the concerns and functions of a general and began to wear the square toga of the Greeks rather than that of his own homeland. He spent his days visiting temples and gymnasiums and in discussions with philosophers. He passed time with Greeks in the company of Cleopatra, whose side he rarely left.
Antoine se voit alors comme un nouvel Alexandre, partant à la conquête de la Perse. En plus de la libre disposition des ressources de l'Égypte, il voit dans son union charnelle avec la prestigieuse héritière des pharaons et des Ptolémées un thème de propagande susceptible de rallier à sa cause tous les peuples de l'Orient hellénistique.
Sun and Moon, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Their twins were born during Antony's absence. Finally, together they began to bond. Together, they enjoyed the pleasures of Eastern life as part of a group of idle rich. The so-called Order of the Inimitable Life defined those who lived on a par with the gods in luxury and excess. But Antony remained a warrior, and he recalled his mission in the east to conquer Parthia. Antony asked Cleopatra for her support. She provided him with large quantities of gold, equipment, men, and victuals. All he needed now were the 20,000 men promised by Octavian in exchange for the ships Antony had already sent for the war on piracy. But Octavian had other things on his mind, his own mission in the west.
Quoda nobisci vesperant. Lila liudnissi victoria coptiam aferet. Ostem doceamus, quanto cum damno imperium Romanum adire audeat.
Octavian fought against Sextus Pompey, master of Sicily, whose huge pirate fleet had cut off Italy, forcing the price of grain to soar.
Proventribus in anibus Romanorum! Milites! Oppugnate!
Octavian wanted to reward the people with a resounding victory, one which would confine Antony's at Philippi 6 years earlier to memory. To do so, he turned to Agrippa.
Milites Romani! Nautae! Sexto Pompeo ac classic piratarum proscriturumque obuiam procissurisumus. Quam potens! Quam fortis! Quam justa sit classis nostra videte. Adversarius quiden, nihilo copias nostras aestimat. Quiscentiam nostram atque usum nauticarum rerum iridet. Quoniam quantum copiae nostrae exercitatae sint, quam acutis in gladi non cognovit. In aeterna gloria sit Caesar Octavianus!
Agrippa, coetaneo di Augusto, ne è il braccio destro, è un personaggio che ha un talento militare, un talento organizzativo enorme.
Agrippa a créé une flotte pour Octavien et réalisé de grands travaux à partir de 36. Il a construit une base pour la flotte en rejoignant 2 lacs en Campanie. Il a créé un port militaire, un centre d'entraînement au combat pour les soldats et a mis au point une innovation technologique adaptée à la nature du combat naval, l'Arpax, qui va faire merveille.
The harpax consisted of a 2-meter length of wood with an iron grip fixed to the end linked to a cable. This was fired by a catapult onto an enemy vessel, which was then reeled in and boarded. In spite of their superior speed and maneuverability, the enemy ships became sitting ducks. Agrippa lost only 3 ships in the battle, while sinking 28. Octavian had completed his task and strengthened his hold over the West. He had delivered peace to Rome and brought down the price of bread by 3 immediately.
Pendant ce temps, Antoine a des difficultés à accomplir cette mission contre les Parthes en Orient.
Antony had rushed into war against the Parthians. He engaged the enemy on several occasions, but the bravura of his men wasn't enough, and he met with defeat after defeat. Exhausted by this difficult campaign, Antony lost a large part of his army.
L'une des raisons de son échec tient certainement au fait que les troupes d'élite dont il avait besoin et que Octavien s'était engagé à lui envoyer, ces troupes d'élite en réalité ne sont jamais arrivées.
Octavia, Antony's estranged wife, eager to help her husband, nevertheless persuaded Octavian to send 2,000 men as reinforcements. The devoted Octavia accompanied the convoy herself to Athens, but Antony, furious at not receiving the 20,000 promised men, refused to see her and repudiated her at distance. Such a terrible affront confirmed the split between Antony and Octavian.
En 34, Antoine va remporter sans aide une victoire contre le roi d'Arménie, nécessaire à l'entretien de son prestige.
In Alexandria, Antony organized a theatrical Eastern-style victory ceremony. At the end of the event, Antony bequeathed the eastern provinces to Cleopatra's children, his own, and Caesar's, Caesarion. The aim of founding a dynasty was to maintain unity in the empire, in spite of its huge disparities. The merging of Greek culture to those of Asia Minor would be the cement. These so-called donations of Alexandria spoke of the future, even of the lands yet to be conquered, but in Rome, these held a very different resonance.
Triumphus Romae, isti agendus fuisset. Romanus non iam fit Antonius. Qui paelici suae progenieque rem Romanam tradidisse ausus est. Et amen. Abinitis tantum isti obsecutus sum. Ut cum eo imperium consociavisem, ut ei sororem meam collocavisem, ut ei legiones praebusem. Benevolentia, ergeitum amicitiaque mea, tam magna fuit, ne quiquam, ne sororis meae injuriae, cuius liberi deserti essent, ne Aegyptia praecipua habita, ne res Romana istius feminae progenie data, ad rei publicae ostemeum abendum me duxissent.
Αυτή η ψάρια ήταν καταλαπτική. Δεν έπιασα ούτε ένα, ούτε δύο, ούτε τρία, αλλά 5 ψάρια στη σειρά. Ένα από αυτά είναι τόσο μεγάλο.
Ιζού ο γιος του Ποσειδώνα.
Ο γιος του Ποσειδώνα δεν άρχισε να γνωρίσει, να ποβείς.
Εγώ φταίω. Δεν άντεξα. Ήξερα ότι εξαγόρασε τους ψαράδες για να βάλουν στο αγκίστρι του αυτά τα ψάρια. Τους τύχησε που δεν έπιασε τίποτα, τον ξανακάλεσα λοιπόν για ψάρεμα την επομένη. Αλλά αυτή τη φορά, εγώ χρησιμοποίησα δίτες.
Cleopatra, aotema Aegyptia, facinorum causa, populi Romani, ostitiam abenda est. Antonio, abista improbissima meretrice, subactum esse fama fert, qui non solum beneficia misericordiamque nostram nil spectat, sed etiam feminae serus a bello pericolisque sumis, suas ponte non aborret, et etiam contra ciues, contra patriam, prodomina bellum infert, quid nobis relinquitur, nisicum, et isto, et Cleopatra, bellum, gerere,
Έριξα λοιπόν το καλάμι μου και τσιμπήσε και non ήμουν χαρούμενος και υπερηφάνος για τις ψαραυτικές μου. Το τράβηξα και τι να δω, μία υπερόχη παστή σαρβέλα.
Τότε είπα, μέγα στρατηγέ. Άσε το καλάμι για εμάς που κυριαρχούμε στη Φάρο και στην Κανόπη. Η δίκη σου ψάρια είναι οι πόλεις, τα βασίλεια, οι ήπειροι.
Και συμφωνήσα. Το γέλιο μου άνοιξε την όρεξη. Φέρτε μας ένα χουρνάπουλο!
Dent operam consules, ne quid res publica detrimenti capiat. Populus Romanus, Aegyptis, bellum indicat facitque.
Octavian brilliantly held himself up as the defender of Romanness and disguised a new civil war as war against a foreign enemy, Rome against Egypt, but in other words, Octavian against Antony. Octavian dedicated himself to building up his fleet. His victory against Sextus Pompey had given him newfound faith in naval warfare. More and more, he began to imagine himself as sole ruler of Rome. His patient and meticulous propaganda campaign against Antony was bearing fruit. Public opinion backed him, as did his two trusted childhood friends. Agrippa, with his naval experience, took charge of technical aspects, while his other friend Gaius Maecenas brought him much-needed financing. Informed by their spies of Octavian's preparations, Antony and Cleopatra knew that war was inevitable.
Πρέπει να σώσουμε την Αίγυπτο από τις φιλοδοξίες του Οκτάβιου. Ο πόλεμος δεν μπορεί να γίνει εδώ.
Επιδεχεία σημαίνει δράση. Ας τολμήσουμε να χτυπήσουμε την καρδιά της αυτοκρατορίας. Επίχεση στη Ρώμη.
It would be a crazy gamble. No one had ever dared to attack Rome itself. But Antony was a man who rose to a challenge. If the element of surprise proved to be a success, Antony and Cleopatra would become sole masters of the Roman Empire purely by seeking to defend themselves. Their imposing fleet, built at great expense, put to sea. It numbered 500 heavy warships and 300 transport and cargo ships. Antony and Cleopatra had embarked with 75,000 infantrymen, 25,000 auxiliaries, and 12,000 cavalrymen, but also part of the treasure of Egypt as a war chest. But the fleet hit bad weather. Antony decided to seek haven in the Ambracian Gulf in Greece. It was ideal for wintering. It was a large, open stretch of water linked to the sea through a strait overlooked by the port of Actium.
Antoine installe son camp, rassemblant déjà une vaste armée sur le promontoire d'Actium, dans la partie plate au sud du Goulet. Le lieu est désolé, difficile d'accès, marécageux, pauvre en eau potable, mais à proximité du port. Il a déjà combattu dans des plaines et connu des difficultés de ravitaillement. Il est en mesure d'apprécier l'atout que constitue une ville derrière soi, capable de nourrir ses troupes nombreuses. La plaine d'Actium, quant à elle, pourra accueillir le combat. Antoine dispose d'une infanterie supérieure à celle de son adversaire.
The majority of resupplying and refitting was naval, so Antony needed to hold two islands crucial to this: Corfu, formerly Corcyra, and Methone. The survival of his vast camp depended on it.
Agrippa wagen wicket, bokum maurorum wagen kipit.
Qui per Antonius et sumore comotus est, et per rutilem socium perdidit. Dei nobis favent. Itaque signa inferre tempus est.
Octavian decided to come to Agrippa's aid. He sailed north for Panormos, and then Corcyra to attack their enemies in a pincer movement. Agrippa was already hard at it, carrying out his naval attacks. From his base camp at Methone, he intercepted merchant ships, compromising Antony and Cleopatra's supplies. Soon, the large Greek port of Patras fell, closely followed by Leucada.
Antonio, che si è portato a nord anche col resto delle truppe, anche con l'esercito, da assediante si trasforma in un certo momento in assediato, cioè a un certo punto viene chiuso sul mare e per terra dalle truppe dell'avversario.
When Octavian arrived, he set up camp on high ground on the northern side of the promontory across from his enemy. It was an excellent observation post and a strong defensive position. But across the strait at Actium, Antony also held a good position.
À mesure que l'été avance, la situation est de plus en plus mauvaise. Les chaleurs sont arrivées, l'approvisionnement en eau est toujours aussi aléatoire et l'eau est toujours aussi imbuvable. Les moustiques ont fait évidemment leur apparition, la malaria sévit dans le camp, l'approvisionnement est de plus en plus difficile.
Le blocus exercé par Agrippa depuis les trois positions qu'il a conquises, c'est-à-dire Modon, Patras et Leucade, l'autorise à intercepter toutes les communications maritimes d'Antoine avec la Méditerranée orientale et lui interdit tout ravitaillement par mer. Le camp d'Antoine ne sera désormais approvisionné que par voie terrestre à travers les montagnes d'Acarnanie et de l'Étolie. L'acheminement des victuailles est limité à l'indispensable. La voie est aussi lente que dangereuse.
Le moral, évidemment, des soldats s'en ressent et par-dessus le marché, il y a des doutes de plus en plus prégnant qui commence à saisir l'esprit des soldats sur le bien fondé et la légitimité du combat qu'ils mènent.
Imperator, non nullos minides appleandimus, ad Octavianum transfugentes.
Alios etiam.
Regio expedita. Genua flecte.
In onum bellum iudicum, in preditores datur!
As the days passed, desertions and betrayals increased. Antony knew there could be no more delaying. It was time for action. But what kind?
Pugnam pedestrem in Macedoniam commovere praestat, cuia exercitus nostri sine dubio superiores sunt.
Sed quid nisi ab exercitibus defendi possint de classibus nostris, quas osti trademus?
Rem colgitur sum cum noctis consilio. Mari pugnare maloc popus vaielamus, patam multi naves nobis sit, tam superiores nostra. Ut post navalem victoriam, etiam pedites costes contemnamus. Et animus citis in classibus nostris exitus belli inest.
Cur imperator, aequo nera, un gladiaium contendis, cur in maris axibus pem collocas.
Le choix d'une bataille navale a souvent été remis en cause. Antoine excellait à terre, mais la mer n'était pas son point fort, surtout face à l'excellent stratège naval qu'était Agrippa. Les historiens antiques voient encore dans ce choix l'influence maléfique de Cléopâtre. Elle aurait dicté sa volonté à la faveur de la nuit à Antoine, animé par le désir d'illustrer la grandeur de l'Égypte au combat en usant de sa flotte imposante.
En réalité, Antoine et Cléopâtre ont élaboré un plan d'ensemble. La bataille navale en est une des composantes. L'idée poursuivie est d'embarquer l'essentiel des troupes et de laisser quelques garnisons à terre défendre les points stratégiques, puis de forcer le blocus et rentrer en Égypte sous le commandement d'Antoine. De là, il s'agit d'organiser une grande bataille terrestre ultérieure en rassemblant les 7 légions intactes d'Antoine, laissées en Syrie et en Cyrénaïque.
Firstly, he was to sail out towards Agrippa's large fleet, causing a diversion and allowing Cleopatra's royal squadron to take flight with the treasure. Secondly, he was to join her and give the signal for the rest of the fleet to follow. Then, together, they could sail to the south of Greece and onwards to Alexandria. The land forces at Actium, which had been unable to embark, would have to march south to meet them.
Ce plan n'était pas absurde. Attendre, c'était perdre. Se replier, c'était reconnaître l'échec sans l'honneur du combat et augmenter les défections déjà nombreuses. Le combat naval était la solution.
The chosen solution meant keeping only the warships and scuttling all the transport and cargo ships. Only 230 vessels of the 500-strong fleet were suitable for battle. The cargo ships were set fire to, while the war chest was secretly transported to Cleopatra's galley, along with sails, masts and rigging.
Là, ce qui est surprenant, et qui a dû évidemment attirer l'attention, peut-être pas des soldats parce qu'ils connaissent pas grand-chose à la marine, mais en tout cas des équipages, c'est qu'on a laissé à bord les agrès prêts à être, et les voiles prêts à être dressés, ce qui signifie que Antoine évidemment avait l'intention de les hisser pour s'enfuir, mais ça signifiait effectivement que c'était un plan parfaitement organisé et prémédité.
Antony joined the fleet and urged his men into battle.
Immensa multitudo estis milites Romanorum virrum robro sociorum flos. Sua enim quisque modo pugnare solet. Corpora autem tantum exercuistis ud omnia terrore implerentis. Res omnius nota es Octavianum per imbecilum esse. Neque terra, neque mari ulam insigniem victoriam tulisse. Kve isplerumque es fideligentus separaverunt. Siqua vis hostis es, in legionibus auxilisque pedistribus invenire potest. Ad naves eorum, adversus nostras, sve maxime sunt, proveci non poterunt.
Antony commanded 3 squadrons, notably the right wing facing off against Agrippa, his most fearsome enemy at sea. On the left wing was Sosius, ready to attack Octavian, while the center squadron stood off. Cleopatra was to the rear of these, with her 60 vessels. Octavian had the advantage in numbers, with 400 ships to Antony's 170, a ratio of 3 to 1.
Alors, à cette époque, un combat en mer ressemblait à un combat terrestre. Une quinquérème ou une heptère s'assiège telle une place fortifiée. Les vaisseaux ressemblent à des forteresses flottantes et s'affrontent en ligne au son de trompettes. Le but est de charger l'ennemi de travers, si possible, et d'éventrer sa coque à l'aide de l'éperon de bronze, le rostre, se retirer et laisser la voie d'eau couler le navire. Ou au moins immobiliser l'adversaire, puis procéder à l'abordage.
Évidemment, puisqu'il a embarqué les agrès et les voiles, ça signifie que la réussite du plan d'Antoine dépend essentiellement de la présence de vent. Et le vent, en cette saison, est un vent qui prend l'Adriatique depuis le nord et qui va lui permettre de prendre le large. Sauf que, ce jour-là, le vent tarde à se lever.
Terribile visu, Caesar. Antony classis est.
Nolitea autem existimare. Maximas naues cum altissimis moeniis, virtutem vestram exequare posse. Quodis autem nauis, ipsa unquam aliquem vulneravit vel interficit. Nam eorum naues, postquam defixierunt. Rostris effringere. Aut tormentis examare, aut dignitilisque inflammatis urre. Nobis, facile erit.
Non opus erit. Coniam et nobis partes validres sunt, et isti feminae consilio utuntur.
Around noon, the wind finally rose. The ships of Antony's left wing were ready. The wooden giants began to move forward. Octavian's fleet retreated under pressure from Sosius. And Agrippa's on the other wing did the same. The enemy's retreat augured well. Even Agrippa was retreating. Was he afraid of Antony's war galleys? Publicola, backing up Antony's right wing, couldn't resist the temptation and took the decision to pursue Agrippa in spite of his orders to stay in close formation. Against all expectation, Agrippa suddenly halted his fleet and changed the direction of his oars. The pursued suddenly became the pursuers. Antony had every reason to be concerned. A clash was inevitable. Agrippa intended to stop their escape. Agrippa's flight had been a trap. In spite of the secrecy in which Antony and Cleopatra had formulated their plan, they were betrayed by one of their council the previous day, who had revealed their intentions to Octavian. He decided to join the battle. Despite the fervor of the participants, no one action proved to be decisive. But Antony's fleet appeared to be well and truly trapped. From her galley, Cleopatra observed the unexpected turn of events and reacted with gusto. Unfazed by battle, she decided to go with the initial plan and force the blockade. On seeing Cleopatra cross the battlefield, Antony admired her courage. All around, the battle raged. Warriors clashed, while Cleopatra made it to the open sea. she had fulfilled the first part of the plan. Antony left in her wake, ordering the closest of his vessels to follow.
Arrivăm! E fun geunt! Nekete rose manibus dimitamus!
Ignes inferte.
Octavian, incensed by his enemy's flight, was intent on not letting any more through the net. 120 ships had already escaped.
Te recumis conficiamos.
Octavian gave the order to use fire. There would be less war booty, but the result would be assured. Agrippa followed orders and used inglorious fire, making the remainder of Antony's fleet unsalvageable. Antony despaired at the tragedy being played out before his eyes. His trapped ships caught fire and sank into the depths. The wing commanded by Sosius was blocked on all sides, a position which ended all hope of joining him and resolved Antony to flight. 40 vessels sank or were burned. The others surrendered, but 12,000 men lost their lives in the waters of Actium. Octavian, an unequaled negotiator, used the so-called flight of Antony and Cleopatra, and 8 days later accepted the surrender of Antony's land armies. Octavian was at the gates of Alexandria. Annexation was imminent. Antony, deprived of all hope of revenge, renounced the company of his men. As for Cleopatra, she foresaw the sad fate that awaited her. As Octavian's finest war trophy in Rome, enchained like a slave, a fate unworthy of a great queen. Cleopatra came up with the idea of spreading news of her death throughout Alexandria to discourage any reprisals against her. But alas, Antony heard the rumor and believed it to be true. Broken-hearted and overcome with grief of losing the one person who could still bring him happiness, Antony took his own life. News reached Octavian that Cleopatra was unable to eat due to the distress of having caused her lover's death and had become seriously ill. On Antony's tomb, she confided, "They planned to tear me away from you. As long as we lived, nothing could separate us. Hide me in this earth with you. Let me share your tomb. Of all the ills that have befallen me, the worst, the most frightful for me, has been the time I have lived without you." Cleopatra released herself from pain by taking her own life with poison. Octavian had Caesarion, the son of Cleopatra and Caesar, executed. Now, no one stood in his way. United for eternity, Antony and Cleopatra would forever remain free spirits, taking with them to the grave their dream of a great Eastern Empire of Greece, founded on the love they had shared for 14 years. The Mediterranean world would become Roman and Western, when it had been on the brink of becoming Eastern and Greek. The adopted young man had come a long way, and now he knew there could be only one Caesar. In 27 BC, Octavian became the first emperor of Rome as Augustus. The Roman Empire, which he'd founded, would last for over 400 years.